The Somme is a shallow, peat-bottomed stream which wanders lethargically through Picardy in northwestern France toward the Channel. There, on a Saturday morning 87 years ago, the British Army began what the senior officers called the Big Push. It was in a wide 18-mile arc north and south of the Somme Valley. 120,000 young men and boys of the British Empire climbed up out of the mud-filled trenches and moved out into no man's land. 0 hour was 7:28 a.m. The day was July 1st, 1916. The great Somme offensive was in motion. Previous week, the British batteries had laid down a continuous barrage of missiles directed against the German frontline trenches. Their hope was that there would be absolutely nothing living on the other side of no man's land when the cannon ceased firing. In fact, what the Germans had done was to retreat down into their 40-foot deep, snug steel and concrete bunkers and wait out the shelling. The barrage reached a screaming crescendo just after dawn on July the 1st, 1916. It was followed by a half hour of terrified silence before 0 hour. And suddenly at 7:28, the ladders went up, the whistles blew, the lads said, "Goodbye, cheerio, good luck," and they began to walk across. Some officers kicked footballs to illustrate the fact that it was beginning of a sporting event. Others strolled across smoking pipes to show that they were so convinced that there was nothing left living on the other side. They came in wave after wave of extended lines. They expected the barbed wire to be cut and the trench all annihilated by their week-long shelling. Instead, they were massacred by German machine guns. By the end of the first day, July 1st, 1916, no fewer than 60,000 British soldiers had fallen. They had gained no lodgment in the German defenses, and it remains to this day a catastrophe without parallel in the history of the British people. Some historians have suggested that that day, July 1st, 1916, at 7:28 a.m., marks precisely the watershed of the British Empire. The grandeur of that last magnificent empire crested then, and it has ebbed backward ever since. Perhaps that is true. What is certain, however, that the finest, the most amiable, the best of Britain's youth drowned out there in the mud of the Somme. A German eyewitness on the July 1st slaughter wrote, "The English came on as though they were going to the theater or as though they were on parade. We thought they were mad." And so they were. Driven by generals who did not believe that interlocking machine guns could rip apart the flesh of young men. Perhaps T.S. Eliot spoke for all of those sad young men. He wrote, "After such knowledge, what forgiveness?" As the British soldiers clambered up out of the trenches, many took no more than 2 steps forward. They died in the same order in which they had enlisted, in long, perfect ranks, buttons polished, helmets on tight, bayonets fixed. They were lying directly in front of the spot where they said, "Cheerio, good luck," and pushed off. On that July 1st, after 62,000 men of the Empire were either encumbrances for the stretcher bearers or corpses buried in the beaten zone of no man's land, the British generals might reasonably had withdrawn in order to cut their losses. They didn't. The hideous bloodbath on the Somme continued on until mid-November, when a merciful blizzard cloaked the battlefield and the sounds died away in the midst of frozen mud and arms and legs and skulls protruding from ice-caked craters in the earth. An American volunteer by the name of Alan Seeger wrote a poem. He sent it home to his mother earlier in the war, but it reflected the sadness and the cynicism of the trench soldier in the Great War. The poem said, "I have a rendezvous with death. some disputed barricade, when spring comes north with rustling shade and apple blossoms fill the air. I have a rendezvous with death, midnight in some flaming town, and to my pledge I shall be true. I shall not fail that rendezvous. Private Seeger was killed July 4th, 1916 at the Battle of the Somme. I have been out there to the Somme 7 times in the last score years, and each time I am there, I am immersed with the total silence of the Western Front. It is a silence which speaks not for what was accomplished here, but rather what was lost. Gone is the terrible overhead thunder of the howitzers, the ceaseless chatter of the Maxim guns, the earth-shaking roar of the blockbusters. Gone, too, are the voices of those laughing young boys who sang, "It's a long way to Tipperary," or "Pack up your troubles in your old kit bag." Gone, too, are the rats, the roaches, the lice, the bloated corpses. There is only the haunting stillness out here in the Somme, which speaks for the whole generation of young men who perished out in the Somme Valley. And of course, there are cemeteries, hundreds of them. Most graves are unknown, and the headstone says merely, there's a little poppy on it, and it says, a soldier of the Royal Ulster Rifles, known unto God, or a soldier of the Scots Highlanders, known unto God. But between the wars, those who were identifiable, the relatives of the occupants of those graves were permitted to inscribe epitaphs. They have a certain haunting pathos to them. Rest in peace, loving son, from father and the sisters. Goodbye, Jack, from Alice and the children. They came upon one of a Charles Williams, an Australian, which has this poignant inscription. It said, "Dear Charles, you were so good to the little children in the family. We will never hold your hand or hear your warm voice again. From Mom and Dad." They are forgotten men in a forgotten war. It is something to brood over.